Hello, today we're going to talk about using Power BI with SharePoint lists. And we're going to cover connecting, dealing with multi-value choice fields, and extracting people data from people type fields. And we're also going to create a dynamic link that will let us link our items in Power BI directly to the form to edit the item in SharePoint. You might be asking yourself why you would want to use a SharePoint list in the first place, and the reason is because it gives you a place to collect data from your users that they are easily able to update or submit, and you can structure your data quite a bit more than you could in Excel file. So you have in SharePoint different column types, like a person column that's validated on the people profiles in Office 365. And you can pull profile fields from that automatically. So you can pull their department, their job title, that kind of thing, as long as that's filled out in their profile. And it also lets you set permissions on the thing that you're collecting data in, such that people can submit it without being able to change column titles or mess with your settings at all. So that's a common problem when you're using Excel files as a data source, is people will edit the column name or they'll insert rows above your table or whatever and break things. So this avoids that issue, and it's also kind of cool to be able to click in to edit the records from Power BI. And as far as why you would want to use Power BI with SharePoint, beyond just the general data visualization options, you also have row level security in Power BI, which means that you can get super duper customized and granular with who is able to see what in your report. So by default in SharePoint, your options are people can see their own items or people can see all items, and there's not a lot of dynamic filtering of SharePoint list records from SharePoint. But from Power BI, you can tell Power BI exactly who should be able to see what things. Like I want my manager to see everything for everybody that reports to them, or so on down the entire organizational hierarchy. You can do that. You can set it by like your salespeople by region, that kind of thing. So the row level security is really cool. And if you don't already have a SharePoint list, I have another video that'll link in the description field that tells you how to set one of these up. Basically, it's a list view that comes with forms. You can create new items in here. People can create or edit items in a SharePoint list. And there's another video that I'm going to try and make right after this one on how to snapshot the data in our SharePoint list to be able to show, say, how many items were overdue over time, like on a monthly basis, or how many items were in what status at what points in time. So if you are interested in that, feel free to subscribe so that you get notified, and let's jump into how we do this. In Power BI, the first thing we need to do is connect to our SharePoint list. So to do that, we're going to go to Get Data and then go to More. And my list is in SharePoint Online. This will also work for SharePoint Server, but there's a separate connector for that. So we're going to go to SharePoint Online List. So this one down here is SharePoint On-Premise. And for the site URL, we're going to grab just the first part of the link to our site. So do you see how it has my tenant name here and then /sites /SharePoint administrators is the site URL. So we're just going to take this part right here. And if you're using older versions of SharePoint or classic SharePoint, you might have a little bit of different format in here. And now we're going to copy this and paste it in the site URL box here. And for implementation, this is basically the API version, and so 2 is the newer one. So depending on when you're watching this, there may be other options here. We're just go for the most recent one, and then click OK. And now we need to choose our list. So my list is this one right here, and we're going to click on Transform Data. So you're always going to want to clean up before you start working with it because you end up with a whole bunch of columns that you don't need. And so what I recommend doing is going through and selecting the ones that you want to keep. You can hold down Control to select multiple and then doing a remove other action. Remove other will take away all of the other columns. So I'm going to keep in the title, the content type, the status, the assigned to. So these ones with the word list in the column values, those are the people fields, and you want to keep those because you're going to expand that people field later. And date needed by, submitted date, submitted by, stakeholders, and I think I want close date. That's a good one. Modified, and we need the ID field. So I'm going to right click on one of the column titles and do remove other columns. All right, so we've got our columns, and now we want to transform these date fields that have the date time into date only. This is assuming you don't need the actual time of these things. That'll let us group it by date easier. So we're going to go to Home tab and Data Type and change the data type to date. All right, and now we have the people fields. So assigned to is a single value field. So it's only ever going to have one person in it because that's what we have for our column setting. So I am okay to go ahead and expand this one out in our current table. And to do that, I'm going to click the double arrows and then do expand to new rows. And that's okay because there's only ever one value in those rows. And then I'm going to actually do the same thing again. This is a function of the 2.0 connector. The 1.0 didn't have you expand it twice like that. So I'm just going to select the title. So title is actually the person's name, not their job title. Job title is a separate field down here. And maybe their department. And this is going to be blank for me because I haven't filled in a department for because this is the dev tenant. It's not a real tenant. I don't have a department value field. But if you actually have this filled out in your Microsoft 365 profile, this will be your department value. And so that's blank for me, like I said. Okay, so that's assigned to, and then you can do the same thing for submitted by. So submitted by is also only going to have one value, so I'm going to expand to new rows and deselect everything and select title. Okay, stakeholders. So stakeholders is a multi-value people field, meaning that if we expand this directly, it's going to add extra rows to our table. So if we're then counting the number of requests submitted by date, we're going to come up with the wrong number. So we don't want to expand it in this table. We want to expand it in a separate table and then relate the two tables. So there's another way to do this too. You could expand out the values and then just have it comma separate them. But we want to put it in a dimension table so that we can use it as a filter. And it won't let you filter properly if you've got comma separated values in there as a dimension. So we are going to go over here to our query and we're going to right click on it and do a duplicate step. And the reason we're duplicating and not referencing is because for whatever reason, when I try and reference this, you lose all of these record relational field things. So I'm going to duplicate instead. And when I duplicate, I'm just going to remove some of these extra steps here because we don't need these. These were the expanding the people fields before. So I'm going to rename this to stakeholders. So I'm going to select the ID field, so that's the unique ID for the item, and I'm going to hold down Control and select stakeholders. And then I'm going to right click on this and do a remove other columns. So we've got now our unique IDs and our stakeholders, and these ones that are null are items that don't have stakeholders. So you can we can't filter this until we've expanded it because the icon isn't there. So what we can do is just expand this out. So we're going to expand and get the title field, That's going to be the stakeholder name. Stakeholder title, I'm going to filter this and I'm going to remove null because that's not interesting. And I'm going to rename this to stakeholder name. We're done with that, and I can go ahead and actually remove stakeholders over here too because we don't need it anymore. All right, so we've got all of our fields, and it looks like I forgot to change close date to date, so I'm going to go back to this step here, the change type step, and go ahead and do that. Date. Okay. All right, so this is looking pretty good. The next thing that we want to add is a link to our SharePoint item. So this will make it so that if we put these in a table in our report, people can click on the item in the table to go to that item in SharePoint. So what we're going to do is go back over to SharePoint, and we're going to open one of these items. And if we go to copy link, there's something very particular you need to do here. So there's a certain URL that all SharePoint list items have. And what this copy link does is if you are using it to grant permission, it's going to create a new dynamic link, and that's not the one that we want because that's not something that is follows regular patterns that we can predict what it's going to be. So what we want to do is change this sharing link to people with existing access. So that option is not going to apply any kind of permission changes to the item or to the sharing link. So what it does is, you see the URL for this is different. So I'm going to copy this and paste it up here so you can see. So do you see how it's got the list name and dispform.aspx ID equals and then a number? So this is the URL that we want. And what you can do too, if you don't want to like come in here and copy weird things, is just go to your SharePoint list URL and tack on this dispform.aspx. Okay, so we're going to copy this and go back over to Power BI, and we are going to add a column. And I am going to make this a custom column. Okay, so we're going to paste in, I'm going to put in double quotations, and I'm going to paste in the link that we just got, and we're going to take out this number at the end of the link, so this 3, because that's the ID of the item that we want to insert dynamically. So I'm going to take that out. So it's just ID equals, and then a space, and an and sign, another space, and then our ID, which is this field here. This is a number field right now, so it's not going to let us concatenate a number with text unless we change the number to text. So what we want to do here is, I think it's number, yeah, number to text, number to text, there it is, number to text. Oops, and do you see what it did? It added in the function that I selected after where I started typing, so I'm going to erase this. It's just number.toText. And this is case sensitive, by the way, and then a parentheses, I'm double clicking this ID field here. So number, text ID, and that should be all we need. Let's try that. Okay, so we want to check and make sure this works. So I'm just going to copy one of these and paste it in a browser just to make sure that we did it right. If I go here, it should go to, yep, it goes to the item. Great. So back to Power BI. I like to rename my custom column steps so that it's obvious what we did, because if you end up with multiple ones of these, it can get really confusing as far as what you did where. So I'm going to rename this to custom create item link. And you can add a description here if you want to, but I'm not going to. All right. So the last thing we need to do is make sure that we have our column types set. So we're going to take all of the text fields and make them actually text. So we're going to select those and then go to data type, text, insert. And did you notice what I did where I went back up to my change type step to do that? That inserts those actions in that step instead of having multiple change actions, because it can get confusing to figure out what you changed where later, and having them all in one place is good. So it actually looks like we have a few more. After we expanded it created some more that need to be set. So I'm just going to do those. Do this one. This one we can't move to the top because we have to expand them before we could change the type. So data type text. Okay, so let's close and apply. All right, so we have our two tables that we need to now create a relationship on. And it looks like it actually auto-created the relationship, but it's kind of going in the wrong direction right now. So relationships in Power BI, I like to go from the one-to-many direction, but we want to be able to filter SharePoint requests by the stakeholder name, so going in this direction. So in order to do that, we need to set this to a direction of both. So we need our filters to flow this way. And now if we go in here and put in our SharePoint requests, so I'm just going to make a table and do the ID, request title, request status. And now if I use our stakeholder name as a filter, it will let us filter that. And what I can also do is do the concatenate the names of the multi-value fields so that we can display it in the table. I'm going to save that for a little bit later and do some of our other steps first. So I'm just going to do my basic table styles. So I like to do minimal here, and this would be the point to import a theme if you have a theme file. Add our dates. So these date fields by default are formatted to a long date like this. Nobody ever wants it to be formatted like that. So what you need to do is I'm going to go over to this view because this will let us do it for multiple at a time. You can select multiple. I'm going to do close date, date needed by, modified date, and submitted date. And I was holding control while selecting those, and now I'm going to change the format. We're going to go with this one, and then the other thing we need to do is we need to change our link, this item link, to a data category of web URL. So this is what's going to let us make it a hyperlink. So now we can go in and for our request title, click the little caret menu next to it and go to conditional formatting, web URL. And we are going to look for our URL fields. Where is it? Item link. I called it item link. Okay, so you would search for link and click OK. So now, I don't know why there's a total showing here. There's nothing to total. I'm going to turn off the total. Total's off. Okay, so now when we click one of these links, it should open up to the SharePoint item, and it does. Perfect. So back over here. So at this point, you could do some fancy graphs if you wanted to, like a graph of count of items. We want the count of ID by status. And this looks super lame. I feel like I really need to import a theme here because I just can't with the default fonts. So I'm going to go to the menu here, browse for themes. I'm going to grab my theme real quick. Got it. All right, so the other thing you may want to do at this point is to have a sort on your status fields. So by default, it's going to either sort them by count or alphabetical, and oftentimes when you're using a status field, you want it to show pending first, then in process, and then complete. So to do this, what you can do is if you go back into the query editor, we're going to go to enter data, and we're going to call this status sort. And So there's a few ways to do this. You could do a conditional column also. You could add a, a conditional column and say, if status equals pending, then 1. If status equals in process, then 2. Or you can create a table and then join the table and expand it. And my impression is that the creating a table and then joining and expanding is going to be more efficient processing wise when you have a large data set. In this case, we have like 10 items in our table, so it really doesn't matter, but just keep that in mind. So pending. Okay, so there's our status. I'm going to turn this off. So I'm going to turn off enable load. And then I'm going to go back to our requests and I'm going to do a join. So so I'm going to select the request status field, go to merge queries, and join it with our status sort. Select our status in both places and then click OK. And then we're going to expand this to get the status sort value. So when I do joins, I like to rename these steps because when you have multiple, it can get really hard to tell what's from where. And then I noticed that a couple of my column names are a little bit lame, so I'm going to change these. So sign. So now if I go to request status, I can tell it to sort by column and sort by our status sort column. So next up, we want to create a line chart that is our number of tickets by month. And to do that, I'm going to just throw in our number of tickets here. That'd be this one. I should probably rename this ID to request ID so that I don't keep getting it confused with this other table. All right, so count of ID, submitted by date. I'm going to do submitted by date. Usually you do close date here, but I only have one closed pretend ticket, so it would look kind of silly. So there's our number of tickets submitted by date, and if I wanted to make this by month, it's going to look really silly because I only have 1 month worth of data. But to do this by month, I would want to use a date table, and if you're not familiar with using date tables in Power BI, I highly recommend Googling them and watching a few videos or reading a few articles. Because they are super, super, super useful. All right, so I'm going to get my date table. And so what I want to do is I'm going to rename this to date, and I'm going to mark this as a date table. So date tables let you slice and dice your data by different date dimensions, so quarter, year, fiscal year, that kind of thing. Mark it as a date table. Date, okay, and then we just need to relate this to our requests. I'm going to go to the date field and relate that to the submitted date. And if you need to have multiple date relationships with multiple date fields, you can either have multiple relationships and then just specify which one is active in your DAX measure, or you can use multiple date tables too. In this case, we only really need to do one right now, so I'm just going to stick with this, and we want the month. So my quick and dirty way of getting the month for things is usually to use this first day of month field and then format that as a month like this. And then if I drag that on the axis, this is going to look really, really lame because I only have 1 month's worth of data in here, but you get the idea. So normally this would be a trend by month. Looks super exciting right now. Okay, so the one other thing that we should probably do is I want to show you how to get a link for submitting new items to your SharePoint list to include that in your Power BI report. Practically speaking, if you're making a report about your tickets by status. That's probably not somewhere that somebody would necessarily need to be able to submit, but for other use cases, you might need that. So I just want to go through it real quick. Go to your SharePoint list and just take the allitems.aspx or whatever your view URL is .aspx, that part off the end, and type in new form.aspx and copy that. I'm going to go to it just to make sure it works. It does, and I'm using multiple content types on this SharePoint list, so there's actually multiple URLs for the different forms. I'm not going to go over that today, and what we want to do is make a button, and if you go into the Insert menu, this menu option called Buttons doesn't really have a good option for submitting a new anything. There's no like plus sign button. So I'm just going to make a shape that is a button. And I change the fill color and add some text. Where's the text? Here we go. Text. Submit new. And maybe a little sign in there for good measure. And then we go down to action, turn action on, change that to web URL, and paste in our link. So now we have a button. I'm going to drag this over here, maybe make it a little smaller because that's much. I'm going to put it at the top of the list just because that's where it is in SharePoint, so I feel like that would be where people would expect it to be. Okay, so there's our button. I actually want to turn the border off. For some reason, the border drives me nuts. Border off. Okay, so next, I wanted to go through how to highlight date relative things like how many items are past their due date. And the way that you do that is in the query editor. So we're going to go to add a column to our request list, and we're going to make this a custom column. And we're going to call this date diff today versus needed by, and we're going to do our date needed by minus, I'm going to paste in a function here because I can never remember it off the top of my head. The date time local now gets the today's date and time, and datetime.date converts that into a date format because in order to do math on two date fields, they have to be in the same format. So we're converting datetime to date. So date needed by minus today's date. That gives us a duration, so we can double check that our date needed by, so this date needed by for 5/10, that is in the past, so 18 days ago, that's good. And now we need to convert this. I like to convert this to a days duration, so transform to days, change this custom column name, because I like to name these, custom date. Okay. So now we have the number of days overdue that things are. I'm going to close and apply this. And now we need to write a DAX measure that gets the count of items that are overdue. And the important thing here is we want to filter on the status, because things that are completed are not currently overdue, even if their date is date needed by is far in the past. So we're going to create a new measure. New measure. Count. Why isn't it typing? Count overdue tickets. And we're going to make this equal to calculate. So we need to use calculate because we're going to apply filters here. And we're going to calculate the tickets submitted. This was the count rows measure we created earlier, and we're going to do a comma. And our first filter is going to be the status. So status, press status, equals, we only want the in process, or, so the double pipe is or, status equals pending. Another comma to add another filter. Our other filter is going to be date diff. If I can find it, there it is. I want that to be less than 0. So that'll give us things that are overdue. And then we can drop that into, I like to use the multi-row cards because they look nicer. Count overdue. It looks like we have 1 overdue. Okay, so the other thing people sometimes like to do here is put the assigned to user in here, so I could put that in the legend. So that was everything you needed to know about using Power BI with SharePoint. If I missed covering anything that you are curious about, feel free to let me know in the comments and I will respond to those. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.